What is up, everybody? Welcome back to the Bootleg Football Podcast. I am your host, Brett Coleman, here with my wonderful co-host, EJ Snyder. We got a big show today. A lot has happened since we had our last episode, including several high-profile opt-outs in the world of college football among prospects that are likely at least guaranteed first-rounders or probably at minimum first two-rounders. Huge names. So before we get into that, EJ, you're here with us tonight. I heard you say earlier you got a little beer for us. I know you got that snobby Pacific Northwesterner taste in beer. So what do you got with you tonight?
Hell yeah, we are representing snobby Pacific Northwesterner taste in beer first and foremost. I have a beer from Hales Ales in Seattle, one of my favorite breweries. It is their Palladium Pale Ale, and if you don't drink things that say pale ale on them because they're pale, you should really try them. Big developments in pales over the last couple of years, lots of flavor. Some of them are not very pale at all in terms of color, but this is their Palladium Pale. Little over 6% by volume and quite delicious, so I'm going to crack this puppy and get to it. Splash beer on my microphone while I'm at it because, yeah, I've never done that before. But, no, I'm looking forward to it. We get to talk about a little college football, but then we are going to dip into some young QBs and what we can expect from them in 2020.
Yeah, I got a Balvenie 12 Doublewood myself, if you've ever had it before. It's kind of one of, like, the...
Hey, man, whatever you do on your own time.
Oh, God, I just got that. Oh, you're the worst. I'm not drunk enough for this yet. It's Balvenie 12, specifically the Doublewood's one of kind of like the hallmark scotches, I would say, that every home bar should have. It's one of like the main sherried Speysides that anybody who likes sherry Speyside is going to have, that. And it's not quite as fruity as maybe some other sherried scotches that you've had. Like Arbor 12 is probably like cranked up to 11 in terms of fruitiness. This is more kind of on the Macallan spectrum where it's just kind of lingering in the back. You still get some light peat to it, but it's very, very well balanced. So if you're not super into the fruit, but you still want a little bit of it, I would say Balvenie is right up your alley. Just an excellent whiskey. One of my favorites. Haven't had it in a while. It's just been kind of sitting on my shelf there. So decided to whip that out tonight while we talk about some huge news in college football. We had a lot of big-name players opt out for the 2020 season in favor of just starting to train for the draft. I'm assuming this means they can also start hiring agents and making money for their likeness now since they're not playing anymore, but that's a legal question that somebody else is going to have to answer. But right off the top, the big names you're going to want to know here are Rondale Moore, Purdue wide receiver, who is just a yards after catch machine, one of the most explosive weapons in the whole nation. Micah Parsons, linebacker for Penn State, who's just kind of a do-it-all stud on the outside. He could rush the passer, he plays the run, he could cover a little bit. Love Micah Parsons. Rashad Bateman, who, believe it or not, was the better wide receiver at Minnesota last year over Tyler Johnson, and he was likely going to be probably a late first, maybe early second round pick, so that's a huge loss to Minnesota. Gregory Rousseau is probably going to be a top 10-ish pick. Kind of a tweener between a pure edge and a defensive tackle. Think kind of like Malik McDowell without the baggage, but in terms of like physical profile and just utter dominance at multiple spots along the front. Great player. Raw as hell, but great player. And then Caleb is it Fairley or Farley? I'm not sure. Farley, who was the other corner at Virginia Tech, which I know you and I love Bryce Hall a lot. And Farley's another guy that's probably going to go pretty high in next year's draft, in addition to a whole bunch of other notable players. But those five are really the big names so far. And the thing to keep in mind here is, as far as I know, there's no real deadline as opposed to the NFL where there is a deadline for opting out. Like these guys, all across college football, all of these players that are likely going to be high picks, they can opt out whenever they want to. If they get 2 games into it, they can decide like, I'm not feeling this. I'm going to go train for the draft. Kind of like we saw, Nick Bosa do, where he got hurt early in the year. His last year at Ohio State, could have come back later in the season if he wanted to, but he's like, I'm going to shut it down. I'm already a first-round pick. I'm going to go train for the draft. He did that. He went in the top 3 or whatever it was. So there's nothing stopping these guys from opting out later if they want to. So these are not going to be the last high round talents we see do this. EJ, I want to get your first reaction to these first group of 5 that opted out, and also how you feel about potentially a flood coming after them with a really, really loaded 2021 class on the way.
Yeah, it's a strange dynamic brought to us. Thank you, COVID. Everything is sort of upsetting the apple cart this year, and we're going to start to see more names do this. This is the first wave. This is the top of the first wave, or the crest of the first wave. All 5 of these players were players that you were going to see in first-round mock drafts, who were going to be talked about in top 5 lists at their position. These are notable guys that have said, we're just not sure about it. There's always some uncertainty. Could be injury, could be a change in system. Those usually aren't enough to push a player over the edge, but with COVID, the questionable health protocols that we've already seen at the college level in terms of multiple guys coming down with COVID after spring workouts at multiple schools, these guys sort of weighed that in the balance and said, you know what, I'm done. I'm not doing it. And again, the major difference between them and the NFL, they're not under contract. They're under scholarship. That's not a contract. They're not getting paid for their services. They can't even make money off their likenesses, as you alluded to. And they said, with all that, and you throw COVID into the mix, it's enough to knock me out, and I'm going to go start training for the NFL because that's where I'm bound to end up. We can see this throughout the rest of the year. We could see entire teams defect. We've had an entire conference come down, the Pac-12, and players band together and say, we're not going to play. If certain things aren't addressed, they put together a list of demands that, understandably, I think, went over like a lead brick. I fully support their efforts. But look, the NCAA has not been quote-unquote fair to its athletes for a long time. This has been a very one-sided relationship. The NCAA makes billions. It makes sure that athletes can't get much more than a free meal, and only a free meal from their university and nobody else. Can't make money off their own likeness, and can be sanctioned for any number of very strange offenses. This is a terribly one-sided relationship where all the money and power is on one side. And when the other side, the lower side of that arrangement, in this case the players, stand up and say, okay, we want our fair share, there's going to be warfare, right? There's going to be a hard pushback. We saw some ugly situations pop up early around the Pac-12 declaration, specifically at Washington State. One of their wide receivers, Cassidy Woods, has declared he's on the list. Wasn't necessarily a first rounder, but sort of ran afoul of his coach there, the new coach at Washington State, who basically said, so are you with this players movement? And he said, yep. And he said, well, that's going to be a problem. So this is definitely a thumb on the head sort of approach. I don't think we could expect much more from the NCAA, given its history and how it treats athletes. So again,
nobody's surprised by this.
No, nobody should be surprised. You're absolutely right about that. If you've been paying any kind of attention over the last, I'd say 20 years, the NCAA is not necessarily pro-athlete. It is pro-money, and if you get between the NCAA and its ability to make money off you, you are not going to be a popular fellow or gal. So yeah, these are the opening shots of, COVID affecting football and the draft. But in a larger state, it's another lever to open up this discussion about athletes' rights in the NCAA and whether or not they deserve a greater share of the revenue.
I will say this, our second topic for the night, all these, second-year quarterbacks, they got out of college at the right time and they got into the NFL at the right time, because the current group of rookie quarterbacks is going to struggle without an offseason, and all the college quarterbacks that may or may not get a season this year are going to be massively set back in their development. So all these second-year quarterbacks we're talking about tonight, the timing could not have been better for them to get their true rookie season in while they could.
Yeah, and that's from a scouting standpoint, we'll have a lot to talk about this year. You know, no senior tape, but also no junior tape on a lot of these players. And junior tape is typically one of the years where you see the largest jump, right? Guys starting to get playing time and maybe got a little bit as a sophomore, started to make a dent. And then you get their full year of junior tape and you're like, wow, they really developed. You know, they came into spring ball and earned the starting spot. And this is somebody to watch for next year when they're going to be a senior and possibly get drafted. Well, we're going to be deprived of that junior tape for a whole class of athletes, as well as the senior tape, which is going to make their junior tape, which they put down last year, all that much more valuable. But a lot more projection, a lot even more uncertainty, if you can say that, about the NFL draft coming this year, because the entire process is kind of turned on its head. But with that, we want to talk about young QBs in 2020, guys who've been in the league for a year and they're coming into their second year. What can we expect? So we wanted to take a look at this and really come at it from two directions. I'm going to take a look at how the QBs are set up heading into the season, really focusing on three things: coaching stability, the surrounding cast, and the familiarity with the offense they're going to be running. And then Brett's going to look at what he's seen on film, breaking down these players from a sort of mental processing and X's and O's standpoint, where they are in their development that way. We figure if we come at it from both ends, we can give you, the listener, sort of a broader spectrum of what to expect from these players, and hopefully give you a well-rounded perspective on really the next generation of quarterbacks coming up in the NFL. So the players we're going to talk about tonight are Kyler Murray, Daniel Jones, Drew Lock, Gardner Minshew, and Dwayne Haskins. Obviously, a lot of different situations, but we're just going to start piling through those. Starting with Kyler Murray, Arizona Cardinals. In terms of coaching stability, I'm going to say best of the bunch. Cliff Kingsbury showed some real promise and creativity as a play caller in his first year in the desert. This duo is the only stable duo heading into year two. That is, coach and quarterback have remained the same. Offensive system has remained the same. They are the only ones on this list to enjoy that stability at both spots. So that puts Kyler Murray in the driver's seat in terms of having the smoothest runway, especially in this COVID-shortened offseason, of all the guys we're talking about. Surrounding cast. Oh, sorry, Brett. We don't mean to keep picking at this scab, but did you hear
we're doing this again.
Did you hear that Arizona stole DeAndre Hopkins from Houston for a song?
No, that wasn't stealing. That was just getting mugged in an alley.
Yep, and leaving bruises. Well, they did. Arizona ended up with DeAndre Hopkins, probably future Hall of Famer. In addition to that, they picked up a good-looking rookie tackle in Josh Jones. They still have Kenyon Drake, who's a great fit for their offense at running back. They added one of our favorite late-round runners in the draft, Eno Benjamin. And Kyler's cast is looking up. The only shortages here are really a stud receiving tight end and probably one more good solid interior offensive line. And then this thing would be lights out. As it is, it's improved from last year. He's got plenty of targets. His offensive line's slightly improved. And again, expect that playbook to be opened even a little bit wider. We saw some really fun stuff out of Cliff and Kyler in the first year. Expect more wrinkles and for them to sort of dive even deeper into the fun stuff that Cliff Kingsbury's got in that playbook now that Kyler's got a year under his belt. But with all that said, with that grand setup, what do you see from an X's and O's standpoint from Kyler Murray and Cliff Kingsbury?
So Kyler Murray is already elite at a few things. I'm not saying he's an elite quarterback overall. Like, there are some things he needs to clean up. I feel like sometimes he kind of gives himself up a little bit too easily when he's under pressure, and I kind of want him to use his mobility a little bit more. I understand he's not trying to get turned into pink mist out there because he's not the biggest guy, but sometimes I'm like, damn, Kyler, can you just run? Like you run 4.4, like you can get out of that.
Use the wheels.
Yeah.
Use the wheels.
Yeah. Because when he turns on the jets, it's like, whoa, okay, that's different, But sometimes I felt he was a little bit too safe with his running ability, weirdly enough. Which whatever, that's a feel thing. Maybe he'll kind of open it up a little bit as he kind of gets more time in the NFL. But as a thrower, he was elite in terms of ball placement outside the numbers. His fade is just gorgeous. And his ability to throw it up with air and put it exactly where his receivers need it outside the numbers, where throws are more difficult. It's one thing if you're really good at work in the middle of the field, where you can see leverages and depth a little bit easier. But if you're able to work with pinpoint accuracy outside the numbers, and especially 15, 20, 25 yards down the field outside the numbers from the far hash, he's got special arm talent. And so part of the reason why they grabbed DeAndre Hopkins, because DeAndre Hopkins is a dominant receiver outside the numbers, especially working on fades, which Kyler is phenomenal at throwing. So the recipe here is getting DeAndre isolated outside. They have a slew of good slot receivers, because Larry, even at his age, is still effective in the slot. Christian Kirk is effective in the slot. And then they have a couple guys that I feel good about working outside on the other side of DeAndre, like Keyshawn Johnson, Andy Isabella maybe, but and obviously Hakeem Butler, who I liked a lot coming out of Iowa State. But the big thing is get DeAndre isolated as a true X receiver outside where you can beat up press coverage. And then from there, it's just him and Kyler reading leverage. If you're playing stack technique, you're throwing it back shoulder. If DeAndre gets on top of him, you're leaving it deep, and DeAndre's going to adjust no matter what. And with a quarterback that accurate, where I've used this metaphor before, it's not just about throwing it to the right neighborhood, it's about throwing it to the right house in the right neighborhood. Kyler's going to do that. And this is going to be a truly special connection in the same vein of Watson to Hopkins. Like it's going to be just like that. And I'm talking immediately. So that was the trade of the offseason to me. And this Cardinals offense, again, we're talking about year 2, consistency in the system, which is so important in this year where you're not getting a true offseason. Not to mention the fact that Kyler played, with this kind of system and terminology, even going back to high school. So it wasn't really new for him last year either. That was part of the reason why he started so strong. So I expect huge, huge things for him. They've improved the offensive line. They've improved the weapons around him through trades the last couple seasons. This offense is going to be pretty insane, and I personally can't wait to watch it.
Yeah, I'd say we're both looking at Kyler Murray and seeing an arrow pointing way up. Tons of talent. Yeah, tons of talent. A coach that understands and knows how to use it will allow him to play to his strengths. They've, again, as you pointed out, added players around him that add to that system, not need to be coddled or sort of schemed in another way, but actually fit very well into what they're trying to do. Those are the best moves, and we should see him pay very early dividends.
Plus, they got Eno Benjamin, so that's all they need.
I know Eno is our guy. Eno is our late round runner. We were really excited to see where he went. We actually thought he would go earlier, but he ends up in a very good place. And running back is a very high wear position. Kenyon Drake's been real solid there, but if he ends up missing time, I would expect great things out of Eno Benjamin. So we'll see. But maybe expecting slightly less great things. Let's talk about Daniel Jones at the New York Giants. So coaching stability, he's got an entirely new staff led by Joe Judge. Joe came from a long tenure with the Patriots, 8 years there. There's undoubtedly going to be an adjustment period. Jason Garrett's in town as the offensive coordinator, and as an NFC East fan, you may like that or you may fear it, depending on your perspective of what he was able to do with the Cowboys. The bottom takeaway is it's new. It's completely new. Different system, different coaches. In terms of surrounding cast, the Giants lucked out in the draft and snagged not one but 2 quality offensive tackles, Andrew Thomas from Virginia and Matt Pert from UConn in the early rounds. Anything they can do to bolster the line and give Jones more time is a plus. Behind that, look, Saquon Barkley's a stud who can help relieve a lot of pressure as Jones finds his way in this new offense. Evan Engram is a threat at tight end. Wide receiver is okay with Sterling Shepard and Golden Tate, who are good. Austin Mack, who is okay. Behind them, there's not a lot. It's a little surprising in a year when there was so much wide receiver talent in the draft that they didn't add any more pass catchers. But they've got good talent. It's not that the cupboard is bare. But if you're, again, trying to help a young quarterback, stacking that roster with weapons, especially pass catchers, is a great strategy. They went with keeping him upright and stacking the offensive line first. In terms of familiarity of the system and playbook, we don't know a ton about it. It is new. It's a new system for Jones. That we do know. Judge, having coached the wide receivers at New England, is probably going to bring some of that system with him. It's notoriously heavy on wide receiver sight adjustments. That's not necessarily great for a quarterback that is learning. We'll talk about whether or not you think that's a good fit. I'm not sure it plays into Jones' strengths, but you recently did a film room completely dedicated to Danny Dimes. What do you think about that?
So the good point you made about the side adjust, because I'm assuming that Joe Judge is going to bring a little bit of that Earhart-Perkins flair that's been in New England for literally decades now. I'm assuming he's going to bring a little bit of that with him, maybe in kind of incorporating it into what Jason Garrett's planning on doing, which I have no idea what Jason Garrett's planning on doing, because he hasn't been an offensive... I mean, he's been involved in the Cowboys offense, but he hasn't been a true offensive coordinator all 7 days of the week in a long time. So I'm not quite sure what his offense is going to look like. But I would assume, to your point, that Joe Judge is going to incorporate a lot of the different side adjusts that he likes into whatever Jason Garrett's trying to do, particularly with the slot receivers, where you could have 4 different reads for the number 3 receiver. You know, when I say number 3, I mean, let's say you're in trips, you're counting from the outside in. So it's number 1, number 2, number 3. Number 3 is going to be your like Julian Edelman type guy. And that position is very hard in this offense because, again, you're running one route that can turn into 4 different routes depending on, you know, if the mic is walling you off, or, you know, if you get a safety that's 10 yards off, if you have a corner and press. Like, again, you're running different routes depending on what the coverage is. So it can take a little while to learn, both for the receivers and for the quarterbacks, depending on how heavily Joe Judge is going to lean into that. So it's of utmost importance for Jones to get on the same page as Golden Tate and Sterling Shepard and all these guys that are playing these positions, because they have to be able to read defenses the same way at the same time. And that's a lot to ask. It really is. Now, I also like the point you made about bringing in the offensive tackles, because I understand there was a big movement among Giants fans to go after Isaiah Simmons, but they could not go another year without addressing offensive tackle on this team. You know, Daniel Jones's pressure dropback rate last year was 41.7%. So a little over 40% of his dropbacks he was being pressured. That was 4th highest in the league among all quarterbacks that started at least 3 games. And there was 40 plus of those? So he was under pressure all the time. And not only that, but his adjusted time to sack average, meaning like how, you know, of his sacks, how long do they typically take to happen, was 3.12 seconds, which is really, really quick. That's right up there with the statuesque quarterbacks like Jared Goff, Matt Ryan, Brady, Rivers, all those guys that just can't avoid a rush. And so not only was he pressured a lot, but when he was pressured, he was getting sacked. And when he was getting sacked quickly. He wasn't escaping. And he's a good athlete. We know he's a good athlete. So what that means is he wasn't seeing the pressure, and he wasn't giving himself a chance to get away from it. So this all ties back to the offensive line, because now you're bringing in Andrew Thomas, who's a phenomenal pass protector, and you're bringing in Parrott, who isn't as well developed, but he's certainly got tools. And Parrott might not even start. Like, we could be looking at Cam Fleming as the starter immediately because Solder is opted out. So again, they need to bring in these tackles to hold off these pass rushes as long as possible, because Daniel Jones is not going to field them, and he's not going to escape himself. You know, the guys that are mobile and feel pressure well, you know, like Drew Lock was, for instance, who we're going to talk about, was well over 4 seconds in his average sacks. You know, Murray was over 4 seconds. Deshaun was over 4 seconds. Lamar was over 4 seconds. Rodgers, Dak, all of these guys, even Josh Allen was higher, because not only could they sense pressure, but they could sense it quick enough to get out of the way. So investing in the offensive line was protecting Jones from himself, because he cannot sense the first wave of pressure, and he runs himself into pressure. That's part of the reason why his pressure dropback rate was so insanely high, because he runs into it all the damn time. So it's protecting him from himself. So I really like that pick, but I can't necessarily assume that he's going to get better at sensing pressure in year 2. I hope he does, but I can't assume he's going to be. And not to mention his deep accuracy is like the polar opposite of what I talked about with Kyler, where Kyler's able to place it on the exact shoulder he needs to, deep down the field and outside the numbers. Jones sucked at that. His completion percentage on deep balls, it was like 28th in the league. It was like 25%. It's crazy low, because even if he could technically throw a catchable ball, he was putting it on the wrong shoulder. So his deep accuracy was not very good. He wasn't very good at sensing pressure. He's going into a new system that's very heavy on side adjusts and takes a long time to get chemistry. He's got tools, and he's a tough kid. And I really like him as a person, and he's smart and all that stuff. I get that. But there's problems here that are hard enough to solve when you have an actual offseason and continuity in the coaching staff, and he has neither of those. So I don't really know what expectations to have, because he has literally everything schematically stacked against him. And I can hope that he shocks me and proves me wrong, but historically speaking, I don't expect him to.
Yeah, I would say our arrow is firmly in the middle and might be faltering towards the downside. I had somebody come at me having a discussion about this situation, about Joe Judge coming into the Giants. They were obviously a bit of a Giants fan, and they said, well, look, there's a new staff in Green Bay last year, and they came out of the gate raring.
Yeah, Aaron Rodgers.
And I was like, there's something different between Green Bay and New York. I can't think of what it is. Right. Basically Hall of Fame quarterback who has a decade worth of experience, being able to make up the gaps, and who is a decent athlete and can especially move away from pressure. Might not be the fastest guy, but definitely feels pressure, understands pressure, and can step away from it. Maddeningly so as a Bears fan. But I thought, that's sort of one of those half-hearted arguments where you think it all looks the same, but you missed the really important X factor. So I would say that the jury's out on this one. We hope for all those struggling Giants fans out there that everything lines up and they get off to a fast start. But I would say most indications, I would agree with you, are sort of stacked against that. So moving on to a different situation, heading out west, Drew Lock of the Denver Broncos. Coaching stability. Lock heads into year 2 with a very solid brain trust of offensive coaches at his side, but they are new this year. So his new OC is Pat Shurmur. Mike Shula is his quarterback's coach. Combined, they bring 51 years of NFL experience between them. And then if you add in Mike Munchak leading the offensive line, you're up to 77 years of NFL experience. That's an incredibly veteran group. 3/4 of a century of NFL experience between 3 positions on the staff. So while it is a different setup of coaches, they are a very experienced set of coaches and have dealt with a great many quarterbacks. So I would say that's a decent footing, even though, again, it is a new staff for him to work with. The surrounding cast, we have talked about this. Denver is a drag racer's dream on offense. Locke is going to be throwing to Cortland Sutton, Noah Fant, Deshaun Hamilton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Alberto, all while he's got Phillip Lindsay and now Melvin Gordon in the backfield behind him. That is a very talented group of offensive players. They stacked that cast to try and keep up with Kansas City, and we will see if they know how to use all those pieces in unison. But if they can't, it is not the talent's fault. Let's talk about that, because there are a lot of talented guys in that group. The offensive line's a little bit of a concern. OT Juwan James is one of the NFL players that has opted out for the year, and anything, again, that detracts from keeping Drew Lock upright for a little bit longer is a bad thing, so it's something to keep an eye on. In terms of familiarity with the system playbook, different playbook, but I imagine that Vic Fangio, the head coach, is going to say to Pat Shurmur, hey, we had a lot of things that worked last year, keep those. And, of course, he'll put his own modifications, spin, and language on that, as most coaches do. But I would imagine they would look at Drew Lock's performance from last year and say, we really want to keep as much of that progress as is possible, because the offense could be scary good. You just finished a Drew Lock Film Room episode. What do you think about this combination out in Denver?
So the coaching staff and the talent around Drew Lock, I would argue, is better than any of the other second-year quarterbacks, even over Kyler. And And that's saying a lot because Arizona has a lot of talent and some good coaches around Kyler. But when you look at the receiving core with Sutton and Judy and Hamler, specifically when compared to, say, New York, they've got 3 receivers already that I would take over any of the Giants receivers, and that's including Darius Slayton. Like I'm ultra high on KJ Hamler, so I know that's saying a lot, and some Giants fans would be like, I don't know, I like Darius Slayton. I like Darius Slayton too, but I have like monstrous expectations for KJ Hamler. So I mean, the fact that they have this much receiving talent, and not to mention the offensive line talent other than right tackle, because Juwan James opted out. You know, we love Reisner. We love Cushenberry. Graham I always mess his name up. Glasgow, who they got from Detroit, is a good guard. Calvin Anderson, we don't really know what he's going to be at right tackle, but at left tackle, Garrett Bowles, I had somebody mention this to me recently who's more plugged in with Denver than I am. I'll say that. And there's a reason why you see Garrett Bowles tends to play better towards the end of the season every single year, and it's, from what I was told secondhand, a conditioning issue, in that he tends to not be super well conditioned at the beginning of the year, and then all of a sudden he gets into shape and he starts playing like he was supposed to play when he was drafted in the first round. Which, when you look at his pattern of play, steadily improving towards the end of the year every single year and then dropping off in September the next year, kind of makes sense. And from what I was told this year, in a contract year, he is in shape, really good shape. And that you could potentially expect him to be playing like December Garrett Bowles in September for once. So that also bodes well for Drew Lock, because if you can get December Garrett Bowles for an entire season, that's a pretty good left tackle in my opinion. So also when you just look at the coaching staff that you mentioned around him, you know, Shermer's a great offensive coordinator. Munchak is a great offensive line coach. You know, Vic, I think, is going to end up being a good head coach. Like there's a lot there for Drew Lock to work with. Now, schematically speaking, I would say that hopefully we can see Shermer use all of that receiving talent that I mentioned to become more aggressive. Rich Scangarello was not a super aggressive offensive coordinator. He wasn't, even though Locke himself was not an aggressive quarterback, it's not like Scangarello was helping him out by giving him a whole lot of opportunities to be aggressive. So I think that Shermer is going to do a lot of what he did for Daniel Jones, which is finding new and creative ways to get into 4 verts and, you know, give him one-on-one matchups down the field and really show off these receivers. And we remember Drew Lock in college was an aggressive quarterback. So I hope that we see him go back to being aggressive and really, you know, use the horses he's got in the stable. And I think Pat Shermer is going to do a lot of the same stuff he did for Daniel Jones, which is really open up the vertical passing attack and let that arm talent and let these weapons free. So it's the same kind of argument with Daniel Jones of chemistry. Yeah, that's going to be hard to establish, and understanding terminology right off the bat for a new offense, all that kind of stuff. All that same stuff applies. But in terms of talent around him, skill set fits, and also just the fact that I believe in Shermer as a play caller, I think the arrow is firmly pointing up for Drew Lock, not as up as it is for Kyler, but man, everything there is looking pretty good.
Yeah, if they light the match, this powder keg could absolutely go off, because that offense has so much firepower in it. If Drew Lock can figure out how to effectively trigger what Pat Shermer wants him to do, this offense could score boatloads of points in a hurry. So going to be fun to watch. That entire division is going to be fun to watch. Speaking of fun to watch, we're going to go on to last year's poster boy for fun to watch, Gardner Minshew of the Jacksonville Jaguars. An unexpected story out of Washington State, late round pick. Everybody thought Nick Foles was going to be the man of the hour in Jacksonville. That didn't last very long. Minshew came in and lit it up for the early part of the season, very quickly with very little prep and first team reps. Came in and showed playmaking ability that Jacksonville really hasn't had in quite some time. And that was exciting for Jaguars fans and NFL fans in general. The old Minshew mania took off. We'll talk a little bit about the later season in just a second. In terms of coaching stability, the new offensive coordinator and QB coach Jay Gruden and Ben McAdoo. I wouldn't exactly call them a dream team, but they are capable NFL coaches. And because Minshew did hit such highs in his first season, and because he cooled off a little bit down the stretch, I'd expect a little natural statistical regression. He really did cool off in those last 5 or 6 games, except for week 17 where they took on a Colts team that wasn't playing starters. But he had some rough outings as defensive coordinators really started to take away his favorite options. But I still find it hard to bet against him. He's just what I would call a gamer. He is a classic gamer. Surrounding cast, Jacksonville is not short on receiving options, and they added 2 good ones in the draft this year as well. So DJ Chark was the breakout star last year, but also they've got Dede Westbrook, Chris Conley, Terry Godwin. They added Laviska Shenault and Colin Johnson this year in the draft. I'm sure they're hoping Tyler Eifert stays healthy at tight end. As far as running backs, Jacksonville has a type, man. They love bruisers. They have Leonard Fournette, Devine Ezigbo. They added James Robinson from Illinois State. Ben Barch, who's a rookie that got a lot of buzz at the Senior Bowl, offensive lineman from St. John's, little old St. John's, could help out pretty quickly on an O-line that has very little star power. If you page through, Jacksonville is one of those teams that lists everybody as OL. There is no center or OT or guard. It is just OL. And there's not a lot of recognizable names on there. So Barch could be playing a role fairly quickly. That's the balance of what they have on offense. Certainly more loaded at wide receiver than they are at other positions like tight end. But certainly we saw that Gardner Minshew didn't need a lot, and he has even more this year. In terms of familiarity with the system or the playbook, Jacksonville wasn't super tricky last year in what they presented. They tried to win with power running and winning one-on-one matchups, and when that fell through, they really relied on Minshew's creativity for when things broke down. And I think that's a reflection of their head coach, Doug Marrone. Remains to be seen if the new duo open up the playbook any further in the second year with some additionally dynamic targets. We talked about this specifically with Laviska Shenault before the draft. We really both hoped that he would end up in a place where they had a distinct plan for him because he is very good with the ball in his hands. He is a very good yards after catch creator. He is not great as a deep ball receiver down the field, but he is extremely powerful and quick. So they're going to have to look for that quick game, short passing, tunnel screen type options to get Shenault the ball. And if they can do that and continue to have Chark run routes down the field, which he's excellent at, and Dede Westbrook sort of stretch the seam, could be a very interesting offense. How do you see it shaping up down in Jacksonville?
So Minshew is interesting because skill set wise, he's kind of similar to Daniel Jones in a lot of ways. Like, he is just tough as nails, very, very calm under pressure. I would say that he senses it better than Daniel Jones. Like, Daniel Jones is not affected by pressure at all, which is a positive with him, but that's partly because he can't feel it. Gardner Minshew feels it, but he's still not affected by pressure. He's really good at keeping his eyes downfield. Believe it or not, his passer rating under pressure was 10th in the league out of all starting quarterbacks. Like, he was higher than Rodgers. He was higher than Deshaun, Matt Ryan.
He's gutsy.
Yeah, he's gutsy. He's very calm under pressure, which is part of the reason why he was productive under pressure. Now, I will say that he wasn't pressured as often as Daniel Jones. Like, his pressure dropbacks was pretty low. I think it was like in the 30s, I want to say, among quarterbacks. Like, he wasn't pressured as often, but when he was pressured, I would say he was better. That's probably the best way to put it. But he also had a lot of the accuracy problems that Daniel Jones had, but in a different part of the field. His deep accuracy was actually pretty damn good. His short to intermediate accuracy was very spotty. So again, it's similar problems to Daniel Jones, but not quite the same. Now he doesn't have the athleticism of Jones, but I think his feet are quicker in the pocket. His arm probably isn't quite as good as Daniel Jones, but it's enough. I think when you look at him, you see a capable starting quarterback, maybe not a great one, but a capable one. But for where he was picked in the draft, that's still a home run. I mean, relatively speaking, if you're getting a guy that you know you can win games with on day 3. So I think there are some limitations to him physically. There are some limitations to him in terms of really working the quick game. I think he's oddly more comfortable just kind of navigating messy pockets and chucking it deep to DJ Chark. Like that kind of seemed to be where his comfort zone was, and especially working off play action as well. So he's the opposite of DJ in that way, in that you're not going to be spreading it out empty and saying, okay, Gardner, go win that way. So there are some limitations schematically speaking, but I think Jay Gruden recognizes that. And I think we are going to see him prioritize, heavy play action, stretching defenses vertically off play action. And then when it comes to the quick game, it'll probably be more like screen oriented and that kind of stuff, not like going empty and finding matchups. That's not really his strength. So I think there's a lot to like about Minshew. Do I think he's the answer long term? I don't know if I'd say that. But again, for the low draft pick investment and the fact that he's dirt cheap contract-wise, he's one of the better values at quarterback right now across the league.
Absolutely, and fun to watch. I said statistical regression, and that's a numbers thing. He did cool off in the second part of the year. We'll see if it turns into a full-blown sophomore slump or if he absolutely bounces back with a new system, comes back energized, and, as the established leader of this offense now, which is a different position than he went through the offseason last year. It'll be fascinating to watch Gardner Minshew, certainly rooting for him. Exciting player and, exciting offensive weapons in Jacksonville. They've got a load of them. Be interesting to see if they can sort of use them all and maximize their capabilities. That brings us to Dwayne Haskins of the Washington football team. As far as coaching stability goes, new coaching staff rolls into town, led by Ron Rivera. Haskins showed some real improvement in the last 6 games of last year, so it was kind of the opposite of Gardner Minshew. He started to come on. He started to look like that quarterback that was starting to get it. The game was starting to slow down. He was starting to hit more of his first and second reads. But he's going to have to start over a little bit with Rivera and his staff, new terminology. In a shortened offseason, that's going to be tough. It would be tough on anybody. So the new OC is Scott Turner. It's Norv Turner's son. And Ken Zampese, the long-tenured Ken Zampese, is the quarterback's coach. They're going to have to do the heavy lifting with Haskins. And again, try and take what worked from last year and save that and add their new wrinkles and terminology in to sort of see if they can lift Haskins to even greater heights. The surrounding cast, Terry McLaurin's a stud. And Haskins started to form a real bond with him last season. That was super fun to watch. Terry McLaurin, in my opinion, is a budding superstar. I'm hoping he gets into an offensive system, whether it's in Washington or somewhere else, where he has some stability and can really show off because he is full of tools and technique. After that, the wide receiver core is uncertain. And rookie Antonio Gandy Golden has a golden opportunity to get serious playing time in the second year because Kelvin Harmon, their second-year wide receiver, got injured. So he is already on IR. Gandy Golden, we've talked about it before, but Washington's wide receiver core is full of guys. None of them really stand out. Gandy Golden looked pretty good at the Senior Bowl. He's got a great chance to earn some playing time fairly quickly. As far as the backfield goes, boy, Washington likes collecting backs. Adrian Peterson, Darius Geis, Antonio Gibson's from this year's draft, Peyton Barber, who's underrated, and Bryce Love, who now 2 years removed from his very serious knee injury, might be the deepest backfield in the NFL. That's 5 guys right there that can run the rock. It's probably going to be tight end by committee in Washington. There's some talent there. They've got Richard Rodgers, Sprinkle, and Moss. None of them are going to be dominant. All of them could find a role. And then rookie Shadiq Charles from LSU is probably going to start at midseason in the offensive tackle spot and round out what is a solid line with a couple of high-end players, Morgan Moses and Brandon Scherf, and a couple of midline players in Roulier and Martin at center and guard. Familiarity with the system and playbook, we're not really sure. We were talking about this before the show, and we don't know what Scott Turner's going to be. Yeah, you can say his dad's Norv Turner, and he's going to have those tendencies, but Scott's his own guy. He has, you can say what you want about nepotism, but he's carved his own path, spent some time at a bunch of different football destinations before landing as Ron Rivera's OC. So we're not exactly sure what he brings, how much they're going to keep, how much is going to be new. So I think it's just it's kind of like that college class where you didn't turn in the last paper and you get the incomplete grade. We're not really sure about familiarity with the system, but what do you think about Haskins in Washington in year 2?
So he how do I say this diplomatically? He had a shit situation. It was rough. It was rough because when you look at his first, I guess you could call it 3 games of playing time, he got thrown in against the Giants, totally unprepared by a coach who didn't even like him or want him, and he was awful. He was flat out awful, and this was like in the first 4 weeks of the season, I think it was. It was like week 4 or something in the Giants game where he got thrown into it, wasn't ready, got picked off 3 times, and then he didn't play for a month, and then he came in the second half against Mike Zimmer's Vikings on the road. Second half coming off the bench. It's like, what do you want from the kid? You know, again, he wasn't ready, and so then he actually gets a full week of starters reps. He gets his first start in week 9. You know who it was against? The Bills in Buffalo. Like, come on. Like, he was not set up for success. So then they get a bye week. He gets to play against the Jets. He plays better, much more efficient. Still threw a pick. It was a bad pick too, but more efficient. And then he started to get more comfortable. You know, he goes against the Lions defense who just couldn't cover a twin mattress with a king-size sheet. So he played a little bit better in that game. And then in the last 4 weeks, you know, after he had gotten 3 games of starting experience, he started to kind of acclimate. You know, Gruden was gone by then, so he had a coaching staff that actually wanted to work with him. Even though it was interim, they were a little bit more committed to his development. He was more buckled down and focused, and you started to see the Dwayne Haskins from Ohio State, you know, having the timing with his receivers, just unleashing some beautiful balls deep down the field, even under pressure. And starting in that Carolina game in Week 13, that was the Dwayne Haskins that I expected to see. Again, it wasn't perfect. I felt he was a little bit too safe at times, and I really wanted to, similar to Drew Lock, I wanted to see him open it up. But we started to see him really get it and start to see coverages and do some things that honestly some of the other quarterbacks in this class weren't doing. You know, Drew Lock was not good at looking for hang defenders deep down the field, and he was throwing some balls that he really shouldn't have. Same thing with Daniel Jones. He was not really recognizing zone coverage that well, whereas Haskins was towards the end of the year. And he didn't have the weapons the other guys did. He didn't have the coaching staffs the other guys did, but he was honestly playing very, very well. And it kind of culminated in the Giants game in Week 16, playing against the same team that he was horrible against in Week 4. You know, having film of himself in that game that he could go back and look at and understand their defense better and understand the mistakes he was making. And then he went in and lit them up. You know, he played extremely well. 2 touchdowns, no picks, which I know isn't great, but for a quarterback that you know, was kind of thrown into an awful situation, the fact that he was able to go out there and be efficient and have like 9 yards per attempt and 2 touchdowns and not turn the ball over and, you know, have a quarterback rating in like the 140s, if I remember correctly, like that was an excellent game. And it really showed like, hey, this kid knows what he's doing. You know, he's able to see the field. He's able to navigate tough pockets. He's able to make really awesome throws deep down the field. So I think when you take the entire context of the season into account and you kind of look at the skill set that we know he has, and then you look at the talent that you mentioned, I think the arrow is firmly pointing up for Dwayne Haskins. Again, it's not the same level as Kyler, which we said in the beginning, like Kyler is the dude in this class, but I think we're going to see drastic improvement. I think we're going to see Washington have an actual, real, honest-to-God quarterback for the first time since a while, you know? And I think when you look at some of the weapons they're surrounding him with, like, there's a core of talent here to get excited about. There really is. And I think it's kind of up to Scott Turner to kind of unlock that. And, and show what he's made of. But the talent is there, and the quarterback is there, and I'm really excited to see what happens, because everything I think is lining up for a massive improvement for Washington's offense this season.
Yeah, they do seem primed to take a jump, even though it is a new staff, and there is always that sort of adoption period. They seem like one of those teams that could perform a little bit more like Green Bay did last year after a new coaching staff came in, coming out of the gate fairly hot. And I know that sounds strange because it sounds like I'm comparing Aaron Rodgers to Dwayne Haskins, and I'm not. But I do like Haskins and his prospects. And again, he did show really marked improvement at the end of last year, like noticeable, the kind that makes you sit up late in the season when you're looking for those teams that are really playing hard down the stretch. They might not have had the best luck for the whole year, sort of setting themselves up. And we often see those teams take a jump in the next year. And I know it is a very strange year. COVID has turned things upside down. Offensive changes, the coaching staff changes. There's a lot of things that could work against Haskins in Washington, but I'm betting on him. I liked him coming out of college. I think he's got a chance to maximize him. All right, you love lists. I'm not so fond of lists. We had some fun with lists the last episode. If you had to rank these situations, so not these quarterbacks, but the whole ball of wax, surrounding cast, the coaching staff, and the quarterback, all as one. You've got to take it as one ball. That's a ping pong ball per, let's just call it situation, per team. Who's on top in this list?
Denver. I would say Denver, and then Arizona.
Okay. And then it gets interesting. This is where the brass tacks come. I think it's pretty clear that Denver and Arizona, you can flip-flop them depending on what you think is more important, whether it's coaching stability or whether it's offensive surrounding talent. There are sort of pros and cons for both, but it's pretty clear that Denver and Arizona are in the best two situations. You can rank them however you like. Then it gets really interesting. Then we get down to, okay, well, now we've got to start looking at the minuses as much as we start looking at the pluses. And what we have left is Daniel Jones in New York, Gardner Minshew in Jacksonville, and Dwayne Haskins in Washington. Three very different situations, but who are you taking in the third spot?
Oh, man. At number 3, I got to go Washington. I know it sounds weird. I know
think it does.
Just because they were such a dumpster fire last year. But I like Haskins a lot. I like Scary Terry a lot. I like Antonio Candy Golden a lot. I like the running backs a lot. Offensive line is, but
better than Jacksonville's.
Yeah, well, in spots. I love Ron Rivera. Again, is he an elite head coach? No, but he's a good head coach. That's what they need right now. They just need a good, stable head coach. I'm not a huge fan of Jack Del Rio as a coach, but we'll see what Scott Turner brings. But Ron Rivera, I at least can run a tight ship, and I think the quarterback's really talented. They have some weapons. And again, this is not me saying it's a great situation right now, but when I look at some of the stuff that's surrounding Gardner Minshew, we got DJ Chark, who I think is really, really good. We got Laviska, who I think can be really good, but we're not sure. Dede, I think, is good in spots, but durability is a concern. Durability is a concern with Conley as well. Keelan Cole, I think, is a good number 3, but again, it's no, we're not talking anywhere near. None of those guys are McLaurin. None of those guys are anybody on Denver. Or obviously, not even close to Arizona either. So it's still a bottom third receiving core as it stands right now, in my opinion. Fournette is, I loved him a lot coming out of LSU, but he's not McCaffrey. He's not an elite running back, in my opinion.
I think he is what he is, and that's
he is what he is.
And it can be good and solid, and he can work in the system Marrone wants to run. But I'm with you. He's not dynamic, and for the most part, he is not a guy that's going to take over games or really change games.
Yeah.
He can get tough yards. He can grind them out. He can be very punishing physically, and he can grind things out late in the game. That's what Marrone wants, and that's what he can do.
I would honestly put Jacksonville at 5th, and I'd probably put the Giants at 4th.
Oh, that was what I was going to say. Is so how do we sort out these last two spots?
Because I truly do like a lot of what the Giants have going for them, especially with the offensive line additions. I think their weapons aren't awful. Like, you got Saquon, who's a top 3 running back at worst. I think, I love Sterling Shepard. Golden's still got a little bit of juice left. I like Darius Slayton. Ingram, when he's healthy, I think can be an effective weapon. Like, there's something there. I don't know what the hell to expect from Jason Garrett and Joe Judge, but in terms of pure talent, and I also think Daniel Jones, in the end, will probably end up being a bit better than Minshew. Not saying that like they're vastly different, but and neither one of them I think are going to be as good as Locke or Kyler. But if I had to choose between those two quarterbacks, I would still take DJ as it stands right now. So again, do I think that either of these teams are like above the bottom third in the NFL? No, but if I had to rank them purely in order, it's Denver, Arizona, Washington, New York, Jacksonville.
Interesting. Cool. Not at all the way I think I probably would have put it up there, but I understand your reasoning, and
what would you have done?
Argue.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think Denver first, because boy, there's just so many pieces there. There's so many pieces of offensive skill players. The line, like you said, is really solid, especially in the middle, which is great for a young quarterback. The coaching talent is sort of off the charts in terms of experience. Vic is going to be finding his way as the head guy even more so. And again, if everything clicks, they could be sort of off the charts. So I would say them first, Arizona second. And then it gets really interesting. It's, do you value the quarterback more or the overall situation more? If I'm just picking out of the 3 quarterbacks, Haskins absolutely comes in before probably Minshew and Jones for me. But again, you got to look at what's surrounding them and whether or not they're going to be able to use it. And I'm less sure of Jacksonville's ability to use what they have. I really like the offensive line upgrades for the Giants. I think that's a big step up for them. Certainly fits right in their GM's roundhouse. And, frankly, he killed it. We loved that piece of the draft. Their offensive line better. Their wide receivers, I'm with you. I really like Shepard, and I think Tate can still be valuable. Couple of receivers behind that, Slayton, and I think Mack is going to be really interesting in that sort of Edelman role if he gets any snaps there. And Evan Engram is a guy that can stretch and be dynamic, and there's not really a guy like that in Washington or Jacksonville. So it's just really interesting to balance. Again, if I was going straight on the quarterback, it would be Haskins. Probably for me, Minshew and Jones, although those two are really close. Looking at the whole kit and caboodle, I don't know. Those 3 are really difficult to pencil. I might go. Oh man.
I know you want to do New York. You're trying.
I do. But what I
do.
really want to do as a team builder is take this section from this team and put them over here, and take this section from this team and put them over here, and then look. Because man, if this was Legos, you could build a really cool set, right? There's great parts of all those teams, and it's just really interesting to see as a sum total, which is the way I posed it to you, right? The whole ball of wax. Who do you really sit with? I don't know. It's hard to put Jacksonville at the end with Minshew because he's such a wild card, but I could definitely see, just like you did, going with Washington on the strength of Ron Rivera being a solid coach, Haskins being the quarterback with the arrow pointing the most up. He's got a very solid backfield to choose from, and as long as McLaurin can stay healthy, he's got somebody to throw to. So I might go Washington in the same spot you did, and then it really is, what do you believe more, the Giants or Jacksonville?
Flip a coin.
And, yeah, it's really, I think that's the fairest thing to say is, although Daniel Jones and Minshew are 2 different guys, like you said, they share similarities. And for one area where you can point at a strength like Saquon Barkley and say, look, they've got a game-changing running back, both in the running game and the passing game. Okay, Fournette's not so great. Oh, yeah, well, the offensive line in New York is a lot better than the offensive line in Jacksonville after the draft. So you just go back and forth in terms of, I'd probably put the Giants above Jacksonville. But again, if I'm picking quarterbacks, it might be Minshew above Jones by a hair because they have different strengths. Just a fascinating exercise. So thanks for ranking those out for me. I really appreciate it.
And I encourage you guys that you're listening also, go down in the comments, leave yours, because I'm very curious to see what other people say. And maybe other people think that Arizona's the top one. So leave your rankings in the comments, because I'm very curious to see that.
Yeah, I don't think there are any right answers here. I think it's easily fair to say that you could see this from a lot of different perspectives, and we're really interested to see what your perspectives are and what you weight more heavily, or maybe some connections we missed between, talent on offense, or maybe even how you think the defense is going to set up the offense. We didn't even get into that. So, as always, football is a really fun chess match to sort of pick apart and pull back the layers of the onion. So feel free to do that in the comments. You got anything else for this week, partner? Or are we going to roll out of here?
No, I'm about ready to finish down in this Balvenie and get off to bed, because usually Balvenie puts me to sleep pretty quick, not going to lie. So I'm ready to get out of here and hope that we, once again, just get an actual football season to talk about in a couple weeks here. Training camp proper is about to start up. Was it next week, I think, is when teams are...
Bears are already there, so...
Yeah.
I don't know what the Texans are doing, but yeah, Chicago's already started. Not much media coverage, but they are there. They're going through in shells. So yeah, as weird as it is to think a year ago I was in Bourbonnais, Illinois, watching training camp and what would be the Bears' last training camp in Bourbonnais, and that actually has nothing to do with COVID. They announced the full-time switch to the improved facilities at Hallis Hall, which was going to be a change anyways, but just super glad that I ended up taking a week of vacation and going and standing in the cornfields in Bourbonnais and watching that, because it was a lot of fun and it's not going to happen again. So moment in time, and take those opportunities when you get them, folks, because you just don't know if you're going to get them again. And training camp as such as it is will be firing up all across the league here. Today was the deadline to declare, so we shouldn't see any more COVID opt-outs. 4 p.m. today was the deadline for that. So we'll continue to watch all these stories. The college one we talked about at the top of the show, and of course how all these quarterbacks and offensive teams mesh. We've got some great content coming for you throughout the rest of the summer. We've got some fun logo projects in the works as well. We'll keep you up to date on those. Follow us on Twitter for the most part. Brett's got his Twitter follow. You can, of course, follow the Film Room on YouTube. Make sure to drop a like and subscribe on the Bootleg Football Podcast on YouTube. You can find me on Twitter at the Draftsman FB, as in football. And until then, keep your heads down, pray for football season, and stay safe. We will talk to you soon.
And wear your goddamn mask.
Yes, do that. 2 if you have to. All right, we'll see you soon, folks.